This is RiverTalks with Jonathan Brush, President and CEO of Unbound.
Was teaching a class last night. We were discussing a book called Pitch Anything. And in that book, the author has this statement that how you frame something determines its reality. Now, the context here is high end negotiations, big business deals. And his point is that how you frame something determines the reality of what can be done inside that deal. And pragmatically, I think that that's probably true. But also, when you make a statement like that, it has a bit of an abrasiveness to think about it in terms of ultimate truth. That seems like a very relativistic statement. How you frame something determines its reality. And that reminds me of another quote that I use frequently by the author Andy Andrews. Just because something is true doesn't mean it's the truth. I think that's a profound statement, and it's one that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And I'm a person who believes in ultimate truth and ultimate reality. My faith tells me there's things that are true with a capital T, that they're true like gravity. And yet, I think that this is a powerful observation that just because something is true doesn't mean it's the truth, that our perception alters reality and it alters the ability of what we can do with something. Let me use as an example of this. This tree behind me is a box elder. It grows along this river. And so here's what's true about box elders. They are particular, like kind of low quality wood. They don't make particularly fantastic firewood. You generally don't mill them to make them into lumber. They don't have any kind of nuts or fruit on them. And so when you see them along a river like this, they're taking up real estate that could be used by walnuts. So there's a lot of walnuts that grow along this river. Walnuts make really fantastic lumber. They actually burn quite well as firewood, although I hate burning walnut because they make such fantastic lumber. And they have walnuts, they have a fruit, they have a crop. And so you could say that it's true that if you have a bunch of box elders growing along this riverbank, that they're taking up space that could be used by something more useful in terms of a walnut tree. A walnut tree has a lot more food for wildlife. It has a lot more, it grows to a bigger size, so it provides a lot more cover for wildlife in some ways. And so aesthetically, a walnut tree looks more beautiful than a box elder, most people would say. And so that's true. We could say in that case, our perception is that box elders are a junk tree. But then let's change our perspective a little bit. What if my perspective is that maybe I'm not harvesting walnut and I'm not selling walnuts for sale because actually it's really difficult to harness walnuts and to get the meat out of the shells and all those kinds of things. Instead, like my neighbor, I have a hayfield here and I don't want this river encroaching in my hayfield. In fact, when it floods, I don't want big logs coming down this river and rolling out in my hayfield where I'm going to have to worry about damaging equipment on them or at least expending labor to move them. In that case, box elders are wonderful trees because they grow relatively quickly. They have a much higher survival rate than other trees around here. So there's a whole bunch of them. They grow pretty thick. And so they stabilize the riverbank. They provide a screen along the river. So when the river floods, a lot of junk and debris doesn't come up into the hayfield and pollute it and endanger equipment and all those kinds of things. So now we've got a different perception and a different reality. In this reality, box elders are actually quite valuable. Well, then there's an additional perspective you can have here. Box elders, believe it or not, are actually a member of the maple family. And so you can tap box elders and you can actually get sap out of them that you can boil down into syrup. So if you wanted to, you could run a syrup line along this entire riverbank, and actually there would be some commercial value to box elders. I've never done that, but I know other people that have. Now, which of those things is true? Well, they're all true. And your perspective determines that reality to some point. Does that mean that we're a relativist now? That some things are true and some things aren't true? No, because none of those things, other things, stop being true as we shifted our perspective. But our understanding and our needs did adjust what was possible, what was necessary, and the way we view this particular tree and whether it's a good thing to have growing alongside the sides of this river or not. That's got some nuance to it. There's a little bit of discomfort in that. You got to think through that a little bit. There's some unevenness to it and some things that don't fully make sense. And I totally admit that. This statement, just because something's true doesn't mean it's the truth. It requires you to pause and have a bit of a pattern interrupt and say, wait a second, what does that really mean? And I would suggest to you that that's a really good thing. That if you want to be somebody that has influence, if you want to be somebody who makes a difference in the world, if you want to just live a more rich and deep life, that you absolutely should start with the premise that there is truth with a capital T, that some things are true like gravity is true. But you also should appreciate the fact that there's some nuance to this world, that your perception is going to alter your reality in certain situations, that what you understand and what you know will determine what's possible. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a fascinating thing. That's the thing that makes this world infinitely more interesting and has tremendous more depth. And there's more excitement to me in a world where I constantly look at a tree and say, now, what can I do with this? What don't I know that would change my perception of what this thing does? How much more can I discover that will help me to have a full understanding of all that is true about this species and how it interacts with everything around it? And that ability to understand ultimate truth and yet recognize that there's going to be some ambiguity and there's going to be things to discover. I think that is the heart of being the kind of person that asks questions, that has curiosity, who's willing to learn, and who ultimately will live a richer, more interesting, and more exciting life.